The rain was cold. It wasn't the gentle spring rain that smells of wet earth and new beginnings. This was a hard, angry November rain, the kind that soaks through your coat and settles deep in your bones. It ran in cold trickles down my neck, plastering my gray hair to my cheeks. My hand, wrinkled and spotted with age, was clenched around the handle of a small suitcase. It was the only thing I had. I stood on the sidewalk, across the street from my son's house. Their house. It looked like something out of a magazine. Big windows glowed with a warm, yellow light, promising comfort and safety. I could see the silhouette of their perfect Christmas tree, even though it was only Thanksgiving week. From here, it looked like a postcard of a happy family. Perfect life. But I knew better. I was the flaw in the picture, the piece that didn't fit. And now I had been removed. My son, my sweet Michael, had put me out here. He had opened the door his father and I had helped him by, and he had told me to leave. His face was twisted with a rage I had never seen before, a rage that made him a stranger. And why? The reason echoed in my mind, so small and so absurd that it felt like a dream. It was all over a breakfast. Single, uncooked breakfast. How could a life, family, 68 years of love and sacrifice, unravel over something as simple as eggs and toast? I shivered. But it wasn't just from the cold. It was from the shock. The deep, hollow ache of a mother whose child has just looked at her and seen a burden. The warm light from the window blurred as tears filled my eyes. It didn't start this way. It had started with love, with hope, with the promise of a new home. 6 months ago, the sun was shining. The air in my old neighborhood smelled of cut grass and the rose Tom had planted along our fence. Movers, young men with strong backs and polite smiles, were carefully carrying the last of my life out of the house. Each box they lifted felt like a piece of my heart being torn away. 40 years. We had lived in that house for 40 years. We brought Michael home from the hospital to that house. We celebrated his birthdays, his graduations, his first broken heart, all within those walls. The ghost of Tom's laughter still echoed in the hallway. Selling it was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. But the finances didn't lie. The pension was small, and the cost of keeping up a big house on my own was just too much. Michael had suggested I move in with him and his wife, Jessica. It just makes sense. Mom, he'd said, his hand on my shoulder. He had his father's hands, strong and reassuring. You shouldn't be alone. And with the baby coming, we could really use your help. Jess is so tired all the time. The baby, my first grandchild. The thought was a tiny spark of light in the darkness of my grief. A new purpose, a new family to care for. So I said yes. I packed up my memories, sold the furniture that wouldn't fit, and I drove the 2 hours to Charlotte, to their new, modern life. Their house was different. My little brick rancher was cozy, filled with worn armchairs, mismatched photo frames, and the faint, comforting scent of cinnamon and old books. Theirs was a monument to clean lines and open spaces. The floors were a gleaming dark wood. The walls were a sterile shade of gray, and the kitchen was a sea of stainless steel and white quartz. It was beautiful, I suppose. Impersonal, but beautiful. My footsteps echoed as I walked through the cavernous living room. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom. Jess met me at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. Her belly was just beginning to swell. A small, hopeful curve beneath a stylish maternity dress. She was a lawyer. Always put together. Always in control. Welcome, Helen, she said, giving me a brief, careful hug. We're so glad to have you. I tried to believe her. I really did. The first few weeks were a delicate dance of trying to fit in where there was no space for me. My room was lovely. A guest suite downstairs with its own bathroom. But it was just Theta guest room. It had no history. No soul. I tried to make it my own. placing a photo of Tom on the nightstand and laying my favorite handmade quilt on the bed. But it still felt like I was visiting. My days, once filled with gardening, baking, and chatting with neighbors, were now empty and silent. Michael left for his construction management job before the sun was up. Jessica worked from home, locked away in her office, her voice a low, serious murmur on conference calls. The silence of the big house pressed in on me. I felt useless, a ghost haunting the edges of their busy lives. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I tried to make a home. I started in the kitchen. It was Jess's domain, organized with a precision that baffled me. All the spices were in alphabetical order. The plates were stacked by size, perfectly centered. It was impractical. One afternoon, while she was on a long call, I decided to help. I rearranged the cabinets to be more efficient. I put the everyday dishes on the lower shelf for easy access, moved the baking supplies closer to the mixer, and grouped the spices by cuisine type: Italian, Mexican, baking spices. It made perfect sense. I smiled, proud of myself. I was contributing. When Jess came into the kitchen later to make a cup of herbal tea, she stopped dead in her tracks. She opened a cabinet, then another. Strange, tight look came over her face. "Helen," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Did you move things around in here?" "I did," I said, my voice bright. "I organized it to be more intuitive. You won't have to bend down so much to get a plate. It'll be much easier, especially as the baby gets bigger." She closed the cabinet door slowly. "Thank you," she said, but the words were clipped. But I had a system. I knew where everything was. It's just, I'd prefer if you'd ask me first. The brightness in my chest fizzled out. "Oh, of course. I'm sorry. I was just trying to help." "I know," she said, turning away to fill the kettle. The conversation was over. That night, I heard her quietly putting everything back in its original place. The soft clinking of plates felt like a judgment. I retreated from the kitchen cabinets. But I couldn't give up on the cooking. Cooking was my love language. A good meal could fix almost anything. When Michael was a boy, a bowl of my beef stew could cure a scraped knee or a bad grade. When Tom was sick, it was the only thing he could keep down. I wanted to give them that comfort, to wrap them in the warmth of a home-cooked meal. I started making my classics. Pot roast that simmered for hours until it fell apart with a fork. Creamy chicken and dumplings. Lasagna layered with cheese and my secret family recipe for sauce. The house began to smell like my old house, like a real home. Michael was thrilled. "Mom, this is incredible," he'd say, taking a second helping. "It's been years since I had this." But Jess would only pick at her food. She would push the rich gravy around her plate with her fork, a polite smile fixed on her face. "It's lovely, Helen," she'd say. "Just a bit heavy for me right now." One evening, I made my famous shepherd's pie. It was Tom's favorite. As I set the bubbling dish on the table, Jess walked in holding a plastic container. It was a salad, full of kale and quinoa and other things that looked like birdseed to me. "Oh, Helen, that looks it," she said, avoiding my eyes. "I'm sorry. I just have to be careful. The doctor has me on a very specific diet. Low sodium, no processed grains. You know." My hand, holding the hot pads, trembled slightly. "I could have made you a salad," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "You only had to ask." "I know. I just didn't want you to go to any trouble," she said, already sitting down and opening her container. The smell of her lemon vinaigrette was a sharp, clean scent that cut right through the homey aroma of my pie. Michael looked back and forth between us, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. He saw the tension, the hurt in my eyes, the polite wall Jess had built around herself. But he said nothing. He just cleared his throat and took a big, enthusiastic bite of the pie. Delicious as always, Mom, he mumbled through a full mouth. His praise felt hollow. I sat down and looked at the meal I had spent all afternoon preparing. It was meant to be an act of love, a bridge between my world and theirs. Instead, it was just another reminder that I didn't belong. I was speaking a language they no longer understood. The weeks turned into months, and the small frictions began to wear grooves into our daily lives. I tried to help with the laundry and accidentally shrunk one of Jess's expensive wool sweaters. I tried to offer advice on what kind of crib they should buy, only to be told that they had already ordered one online after weeks of research. Every attempt I made to be a mother, to be useful, was seen as an intrusion. I started to feel invisible. I would spend my days in my room, watching old movies on a small television. The sound of their lives, Jess's brisk footsteps, Michael's booming laugh, their quiet murmurs behind their bedroom door at night happened around me. Without me, I was living in their house, but I wasn't part of their home. My only lifeline was Carol, my best friend from back home. I called her every day. She just doesn't want me here. Carol, I'd whisper into the phone, huddled on my bed. I try so hard, and nothing is ever right. Give it time, Helen, Carol would say in her calm, sensible voice. It's a big adjustment for everyone, especially for a young, pregnant woman who's used to her own space. Just try to, I don't know, take a step back. Let them come to you. Take a step back. It sounded like giving up. It sounded like admitting defeat. I was a mother. My job was to care for my family. How do you take a step back from who you are? But I tried. I stopped offering to cook dinner every night. I stopped tidying up the living room when they left it messy. I stayed in my room, waiting for an invitation to join their life that never came. The silence in the house grew louder. The distance between us became a chasm. Then came the day of the argument. The first real one. It was a Saturday. I had been feeling particularly lonely. I missed my garden. I missed the feel of dirt under my fingernails. I saw that the little flower bed by their front porch was full of weeds. An idea sparked. I could fix that. I could bring some beauty to this sterile place. I spent the entire morning pulling weeds, turning the soil, and carefully planting the rose bush I'd brought from my old house. It was a cutting from the one Tom had planted for our 10th anniversary. It was precious to me. I watered it carefully, my heart feeling lighter than it had in months. When Jess came out to get the mail, she stopped and stared. I waited for her to be pleased, to see the love I had poured into that small patch of earth. Instead, her face clouded over. Helen, what did you do? I fixed up the flower bed. I even planted my climbing rose. In a few years, it will cover this whole porch. It will be beautiful. That's a peace rose, isn't it? She asked, her tone sharp. Yes. How did you know? Because my mother is highly allergic to them, she said, her voice rising. Like, hospital visit allergic. We've been planning for her to stay with us for a month after the baby is born. I can't have this here. My heart sank into my shoes. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. That's the point, Helen, she snapped, her control finally breaking. You never know. Because you never ask. You just do whatever you want. You rearrange my kitchen. You try to feed me things I can't eat. And now this. This is my home. When are you going to understand that? Tears pricked my eyes. Her words were like stones, each one finding a soft place to hit. Before I could respond, Michael came out, drawn by our raised voices. What's going on? He asked, looking at Jess's angry face and my crestfallen one. Jess pointed a trembling finger at the rose bush. Your mother planted a flower that could literally put my mother in the hospital. After I've asked her, again and again, to just give me some space. Michael looked at the rose bush, then at me. I saw the conflict in his eyes. He was torn between his wife and his mother. It was a battle I was destined to lose. "Mom," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Why would you do that without asking?" "I was just trying to make things nice," I whispered, the words getting stuck in my throat. "Well, you didn't," Jess said, turning and storming back into the house. The door slammed shut behind her, a sound as final as a gunshot. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wouldn't look at me. "You're going to have to dig it up, Mom." I stared at the little rose bush, its green leaves so full of hope. It was the last living piece of my old life, of my life with Tom, and now I had to tear it out of the ground. That night, I cried myself to sleep, mourning a home I had already lost and a new one I would never have. The war had been declared, and I hadn't even realized we were fighting. The next morning, I dug up the rose bush. The soil was cold and damp from the night's rain. My back ached with each shovelful of dirt I turned. I tried to be careful, to preserve the roots, but my hands were shaking with a mixture of sorrow and anger. This felt like a desecration, like digging up a memory. I placed the wounded plant into a plastic pot, its thorny branches looking bare and defeated. It would never thrive here. I knew it, and the plant seemed to know it too. Neither of us belonged in this perfectly manicured, sterile garden. I left the pot on the back patio, a sad monument to my failure. An awful quiet settled over the house after that. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating one, thick with unspoken words and resentment. We moved around each other like strangers in a hotel. I'd hear the front door open and close as Michael left for work. I'd hear the gentle click of Jess's keyboard from her office. We would sometimes pass in the hallway, offering tight, meaningless smiles. "Good morning," we'd murmur, our eyes fixed on the floor, the wall, anywhere but at each other. Mealtimes were the worst. I stopped cooking for them entirely. I would wait until I heard them in the kitchen. The sounds of them preparing their own food, the chop of a knife on a cutting board, the sizzle of olive oil in a pan, and I would stay in my room, my stomach growling. Only when they had finished and retreated to the living room would I creep out to make myself a small sandwich or a bowl of soup. I ate alone, standing over the sink, the gleaming stainless steel reflecting my own lonely face. Michael tried, in his clumsy, male way, to fix things. He'd bring home little gifts, a box of my favorite chocolates, a new novel by an author I liked. "Thought you might enjoy this, Mom," he'd say, placing it on the table near my door before quickly walking away, as if afraid I might actually try to talk to him. The gifts felt like peace offerings, but also like hush money, bribes to keep the peace, to keep me from upsetting his carefully constructed life with his wife. I would thank him, but the gifts did little to warm the growing chill in my heart. I spent most of my time on the phone with Carol. She was my anchor to a world where I made sense, where I had value. "It's like I'm a ghost, Carol," I told her one afternoon, my voice a low whisper so no one would overhear. "I'm living in my own son's house, and I've never felt more alone. I don't have a purpose here. I don't have a place." "Helen, have you tried talking to her? Really talking? I mean, not arguing about a rose bush, but sitting down and telling her how you feel." I sighed. "What's the point? She thinks I'm an interfering old woman. She doesn't want my help. She doesn't want anything from me. Maybe she just wants to be asked," Carol suggested gently. "She's a modern woman, Helen. They do things differently. It's not a criticism of you. It's just different." "Different how?" I asked, my voice sharp with bitterness. "By treating a mother like a nuisance? By making a home so perfect there's no room for anyone to be comfortable in it?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're hurt," Carol said finally. "I get that. But sitting in your room isn't going to solve anything. This is your life now. Honey, you have to find a way to live it. Her words were meant to be helpful. I knew, but they felt like another criticism. Find a way to live it. I was trying, but every door I tried to open was locked. The breaking point, the moment that truly defined my new, diminished role in their lives, came about 2 weeks after the Rosebush incident. It wasn't a loud, angry confrontation. It was far worse. It was quiet, calm, and utterly devastating. It was a Tuesday evening. Michael was working late. I was in the kitchen, not cooking, just being there. I missed the simple rhythm of it. I ran my hand over the cool quartz countertop, remembering how I used to roll out pie dough on a wooden board just like this. My kitchen had been the heart of my home. This kitchen was just a room with expensive appliances. Jess came in, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman in her second trimester. She was carrying a mug and went to the electric kettle. For a moment, we stood in silence. The only sound the low hum of the refrigerator. Helen, she said, her back still to me. Can we talk for a minute? My heart gave a nervous flutter. Of course, dear. She turned around, leaning against the counter. She wasn't angry. Her face was calm. Her expression measured. It was her lawyer face, the one she used when she was about to lay out an irrefutable case. I want to apologize, she began, and I felt a flicker of hope. My hormones are all over the place, and I know I've been difficult. The argument about the flower bed was stressful for everyone, and I'm sorry for my part in that. It's all right, I said quickly. I shouldn't have done it without asking. I see that now. Thank you, she said with a small nod. And that's really what I want to talk about. About this house, and how we can all live in it together, happily. The hope in my chest grew a little warmer. Maybe Carol was right. Maybe we could fix this. Michael and I are so grateful that you're here, she continued, her voice smooth and even, especially with the baby coming. But we're also starting our own family, building our own traditions. And for me, a big part of that is creating my own home, my own kitchen. She paused, and the hum of the refrigerator suddenly seemed very loud. I knew, with a dreadful certainty, where this was going. You are a wonderful cook, Helen. Michael talks about your cooking all the time. But I need to be the one who cooks here. I need to be the one who plans the meals, who organizes the pantry, who decides what our family eats. It's important for me to feel in control of my own home, of my own nest, especially now. Her words were so reasonable, so polite, and they cut me deeper than any angry shout ever could. She wasn't just talking about cooking. She was talking about my identity. She was gently, kindly, and systematically erasing my purpose. The one thing I had left to offer, the one skill I had honed over a lifetime of caring for my family, was being taken from me. I need this to be my space, she said, gesturing to the kitchen around her. I would love it if you would think of yourself as our cherished guest. A guest in our home. A guest. Not family. Not a mother. Not a grandmother-to-be who would help raise her grandchild. A guest. A temporary visitor with no rights and no role. I couldn't speak. My throat was thick with unshed tears. I felt the blood drain from my face. I just stood there, my hand still resting on the cold, unforgiving countertop. I understand. I finally managed to whisper. The 2 words felt like a lie, like a surrender. Thank you, Jess said, her voice full of relief. She clearly thought we had reached a mature and healthy understanding. She had no idea that she had just taken a knife and carved out my heart. I'm so glad we could have this chat. I'll make us some tea. She turned back to the kettle. Her part in the conversation finished. She had set her boundaries. She had won. I walked out of the kitchen without another word. I went to my room, the guest room, and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, the handmade quilt my only comfort. And I stared at the picture of Tom on my nightstand. His smiling face looked back at me from a happier time. A time when I had a home. A time when my love wasn't something to be managed or contained. What would you do, Tom? I asked his silent image. What would you tell me to do? But there was no answer. There was only the quiet ticking of the clock and the crushing realization that I had become a stranger in my son's house. Jess didn't just want me out of her kitchen. She wanted my entire way of being. My entire identity as a mother. Packed away in a box and stored in the attic. Brought out only on special occasions. I was no longer the heart of the family. I was a guest. And a guest, eventually, is expected to leave. From that day on, I became the perfect guest. I was a ghost in their beautiful, gray-walled house. I was quiet, unobtrusive, and I took up almost no space at all. I made my bed every morning, smoothing the quilt until there were no wrinkles. I kept my bathroom spotless, wiping down the counter after each use. I lived within the four walls of my room, and when I had to leave it, I moved through the rest of the house as if on tiptoe, careful not to disturb the air. The kitchen, once the place I felt most at home, became foreign territory. I wouldn't even use it to make tea anymore. The following day, I put on my walking shoes and walked the mile to the small grocery store down the road. I bought a small electric kettle, a mug, a box of tea bags, and some instant soup packets. For food, I bought a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a small bunch of bananas. I carried my sad little haul back in 2 plastic bags that cut into my fingers. When I got back, Jess was in the kitchen, unloading a mountain of colorful, organic vegetables from paper bags. She was glowing, her pregnancy rounding her face and softening her sharp edges. She looked up and smiled at me, a genuine, relieved smile. She thought our talk had worked. "Oh, Helen, you went for a walk. That's wonderful," she said. "Yes, the fresh air was nice," I replied, my own smile feeling as thin as paper. I walked past her, past the gleaming counters and the expensive refrigerator full of their food, and I took my plastic bags into my room. I shut the door, the click of the latch sounding loud in the silence. I set up my little kettle on the dresser, creating a sad, makeshift kitchen in the corner. This was my space now. This was all I had left. The change was immediate and profound. The house, which had once smelled of my baking or the slow simmer of a stew, now smelled of nothing at all. Or rather, it smelled of Jess's cooking, the sharp scent of garlic and ginger, the clean aroma of steamed vegetables. It was healthy and vibrant, but to me, smelled like loss. Michael felt it the most. He was a man who lived by routine and comfort. He was used to coming home to a sense of warmth, a sense that someone had been tending the heart of the home all day. Now, he came home to a silent house where his pregnant wife was exhausted from work and his mother was a phantom. A few days into my new role as the perfect guest, he knocked on my door. It was after dinner, a meal I had heard them eating but had not seen. I was sitting in my armchair, reading a book, a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich on a napkin beside me. "Come in," I called, my voice sounding rusty from disuse. He opened the door and stood in the entryway, looking uncomfortable. He looked from me to the kettle on my dresser, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Mom? What's all this?" he asked, gesturing to my little setup. "Why are you eating in here? Jess made that quinoa stir-fry thing. It looked lovely," I said politely. I just wasn't very hungry. I had a late lunch. It was a lie. I was starving. But the thought of sitting at that table, a guest at my own son's board, was more than I could bear. "Are you okay?" he asked, and for the first time, his voice held a note of real concern, not just frustration. "You've been so quiet. It's not like you." "I'm fine, Michael," just giving Jessica her space. Like she asked. She needs to run her home her way. I understand that. I delivered the lines perfectly, with no trace of bitterness. I was just stating the facts. His shoulders slumped. He looked so much like his father when he was tired. It doesn't feel right. Mom, the house feels empty. Nonsense, I said, my voice a little too bright. It's full of life. You and Jess, and the baby on the way. So wonderful. Full house. Now, you go on and spend time with your wife. She needs you. I was dismissing him. His mother, who had never once in his 42 years turned him away, was gently pushing him out of my room. He lingered for a moment, 1,000 questions in his eyes that he didn't know how to ask. Then, with a defeated sigh, he nodded. Okay, Mom. Good night. Good night, dear, I said, turning a page in my book as if I was deeply engrossed. The moment the door clicked shut, I put the book down, my hands trembling. This was harder than I thought. Punishing them felt too much like punishing myself. The tension simmered for another week. A low, constant hum of unease beneath the surface of their lives. Then, the package arrived. I was in my room, looking out the window, when the delivery truck pulled up. The driver left a large, heavy-looking box on the front porch. The label was from a fancy baby furniture company. It was probably the crib Jess had been so excited about. My first instinct, the mother instinct, was to go and bring it inside. It looked like it might rain. But then Jess's words echoed in my head. A guest in our home. I need this to be my space. Bringing in a package, especially one so important, felt like crossing a line she had drawn so clearly in the sand. It wasn't my package. It wasn't my baby. It wasn't my home. So I sat there. I watched the sky darken from a pale gray to a bruised purple. I watched the first drops of rain begin to fall, speckling the dry concrete of the porch. Then the drops became a steady drizzle, and the drizzle became a downpour. I sat in my chair, a silent witness, as the cardboard box began to soften and darken with water. A part of me screamed in protest. A small, sane voice that said, Helen, this is foolish. This is cruel. But the hurt, wounded part of me was stronger. It whispered, you are just following the rules. This is what she wanted. An hour later, I heard Jess's office door open. I heard her footsteps. Then a sharp, horrified gasp. The front door was thrown open. Oh my God. Michael. Michael. Come here. I heard Michael's heavy tread as he ran from the living room. I heard their frantic, angry voices as they struggled to drag the heavy, now soggy box inside. I stayed perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs. A few minutes later, my door was flung open. I didn't even have time to be startled. Jess stood there, her face white with rage, her eyes blazing. Rainwater dripped from the ends of her hair. You saw it, didn't you? She accused, her voice shaking. You were in here. You saw the delivery man. You just sat there and watched it get ruined. I looked at her calmly, my own heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I did see it arrive. Yes. And you just left it there? Do you have any idea how much that crib cost? Do you have any idea how long we waited for it? It's probably ruined. I'm very sorry to hear that, I said, my voice betraying no emotion. But you made it very clear that I am not to interfere with your home or your preparations for the baby. I didn't feel it was my place to touch your property. Her mouth fell open. She stared at me as if I had just slapped her. The sheer, cold logic of my excuse was more infuriating than any defense could have been. Your place? She repeated, her voice rising to a shriek. Your place? This is sheer spite. Helen, this is the most passive-aggressive, childish thing I have ever seen. Michael appeared behind her, his face grim. He put a hand on his wife's arm. Jess, calm down. The stress isn't good for the baby. Don't tell me to calm down. She spun on him. Your mother just sat there and watched our baby's crib get destroyed by rain because her feelings are hurt. Do you see what I'm living with? Michael turned his tired, angry eyes to me. Mom, what the hell? Why wouldn't you just bring the box inside? It's common sense. It's common decency. I was respecting Jessica's boundaries. I said, my voice starting to tremble despite my best efforts. The dam of my composure was beginning to crack. I am a guest here. Guests don't take charge of their host's deliveries. Oh, stop it. Michael exploded. His voice a roar that echoed in the small room. Just stop it. Stop this guest nonsense. You're my mother. For God's sake. Can't you two just act like normal people? I go to work for 12 hours a day, breaking my back to pay for this house. And I come home to this war. I am so sick of it. He didn't side with either of us. He just attacked the situation. A man drowning and trying to fight the water itself. He turned and guided his weeping wife out of my room, slamming the door behind him with a force that rattled the picture of Tom on my nightstand. I was left in the ringing silence. My body was shaking uncontrollably. Tears streamed down my face, hot and bitter. I had won the argument, in a twisted sort of way. I had used their own rules against them, but all I felt was a profound, bottomless misery. I reached for the phone and dialed Carol's number, my fingers fumbling with the buttons. He yelled at me. Carol. I sobbed when she answered. My own son. He yelled at me. I told her everything. About the kettle, the peanut butter sandwiches, the crib left in the rain. I expected her to soothe me, to tell me I was in the right. But there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Helen, she said, her voice unusually stern. Honey, you need to listen to me. What you did, that wasn't about boundaries. That was about punishment. There's a difference between giving someone space and building a wall of ice around yourself. You're hurting them, Helen, and you're hurting yourself even more. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had been so wrapped up in my own pain, my own sense of rejection, that I hadn't seen my own actions clearly. I had become the cold, unfeeling person they accused me of being. I wasn't just a victim in this story. I was also the villain. The realization was a new kind of agony, one that left me breathless. Carol's words stayed with me long after the phone call ended. They were a harsh mirror, and I didn't like the reflection I saw. Was I really being spiteful? Was I punishing them? I had told myself I was simply protecting my own heart, retreating from a battle I couldn't win. But as I replayed the scene with the crib in my mind, a cold shame washed over me. I had derived a small, bitter satisfaction from watching that box get rained on. I had wanted them to feel a fraction of the loss that I felt. Carol was right. It was a cruel thing to do. I thought about going out there, to the living room, and apologizing. The words formed in my head. I'm sorry. I was wrong. But my feet felt nailed to the floor. Pride, that old, stubborn enemy, held me captive. Apologizing would mean admitting that Jess had been right all along, that my attempts to help had been a problem. It would mean surrendering the last piece of my righteous anger. And without that anger, all I had left was pain. So I stayed in my room, a prisoner of my own making. The next few weeks were the worst yet. The silence in the house was no longer just heavy. It was glacial. We had moved beyond awkwardness into a state of open hostility that was expressed through complete and total avoidance. If I came into the kitchen while Jess was there, she would immediately turn and walk out, leaving her half-made tea on the counter. If Michael and I passed in the hall, he would stare straight ahead, his jaw tight, as if I were a stranger he was trying to ignore in a crowd. They started to live their life entirely around me. They ate their meals later, after I had retreated to my room for the night. They spoke in low murmurs, their voices dropping to a whisper if they thought I might be near. I would sometimes stand by my closed door, straining to hear, to catch any scrap of a connection to their world. But all I could hear was the muffled rhythm of a life from which I was completely excluded. One evening, I couldn't bear the isolation any longer. The house was quiet, and I assumed they were watching television in the living room. I just wanted a glass of water from the kitchen. I opened my door slowly and crept out, feeling like an intruder. But as I passed the living room entryway, I froze. They weren't watching TV. They were sitting on the couch, side by side, but not touching. The lamp beside them cast long shadows across the room. Jess was crying, quiet, heartbroken sobs that she muffled in her hands. Michael sat beside her, his head in his hands, his back bowed with a weight that seemed too heavy for one man to carry. "I can't do this anymore, Mike," Jess whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I feel like a stranger in my own house. I feel like I'm constantly being watched, constantly being judged. I'm so stressed out all the time. And the doctor says it's not good for the baby. This was supposed to be the happiest time of our lives. And it's miserable." My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. She thought I was judging her. After all this, she still saw me as the aggressor, the source of her unhappiness. Michael finally looked up, his face etched with exhaustion. "I know, Jess. I know. I don't know what to do. She's my mother. I can't just throw her out on the street." "I'm not asking you to do that," she sobbed. "But this isn't working. Feels like she hates me. It feels like she's trying to sabotage us. That whole thing with the crib, that was a message. Mike, she was telling me she doesn't want me or this baby here." The accusation was so monstrous, so far from the truth, that it knocked the breath from my lungs. I loved this unborn child more than anything. The thought of this baby was the only thing that had kept me going. How could she think that? "She doesn't hate you," Michael said. But his voice lacked conviction. "She's just from a different time. She doesn't understand. She's lonely since Dad died. She's lashing out." "Well, I'm the one she's lashing out at." Jess's voice rose, cracking with emotion. "I'm the one who has to live with her disapproval every single day. Mike, you have to do something. You have to fix this. You promised you would fix this. Please. For me. For the baby. This is not our home anymore. It's hers." He reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she cried against his shoulder. "Okay," he said, his voice a low, defeated rumble. "Okay, Jess. I'll talk to her. I'll figure it out. I'll fix it. Promise." I backed away from the doorway, my heart turning to ice. I stumbled back to my room, my mind reeling. I'll fix it. What did that mean? What was he going to fix? It was clear what Jess wanted. She wanted me gone. And my son, my loving Michael, had just promised his wife that he would make it happen. The paranoia took root in me then, a dark and twisting vine. Every quiet conversation they had was about me. Every time they closed their bedroom door, I was sure they were planning my eviction. I started to feel like a hunted animal. My little room no longer felt like a sanctuary. Felt like a cage. A holding cell where I was just waiting for my sentence to be carried out. I stopped leaving my room almost entirely. I subsisted on my meager supplies, rationing the peanut butter and tea bags. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. I felt myself shrinking, physically and spiritually, fading into the pale gray walls of their house. And then came the morning. The final morning. It started like any other day in our Cold War. Silence. I woke up early. The anxiety in my stomach a familiar companion. I could hear movement upstairs. A shower running. The low murmur of voices. Then, the front door closed as Michael left for work. Or so I thought. A few minutes later, There was a soft knock on my door. It was Jess. This was unusual. She hadn't knocked on my door in weeks. "Helen?" she called out, her voice sounding strained. "Can I come in for a second?" I opened the door. She looked awful. Her face was pale and slick with a thin sheen of sweat. She was clutching her stomach. "Are you all right, dear?" I asked, my concern momentarily overriding our animosity. "It's just the morning sickness," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's been really bad the last few days." I was wondering. Michael had to run back to the office for a minute. He forgot some important papers. He said he'd only be gone a half hour. "Feel so weak. I don't think I can stand long enough to cook. Would you? Would you mind just making me a piece of toast? Plain. With a little butter?" I stared at her. After everything. After she had banished me from the kitchen, declared it her sacred space. After she had made it painfully clear that my cooking was not wanted, not needed. Now she was asking me for help. She was asking me to do the one thing she had forbidden me from doing. The request was a spark on a field of dry tinder. All the hurt, all the resentment, all the weeks of feeling useless and rejected, flared up inside me. The bitter satisfaction I had felt about the crib was nothing compared to the powerful, righteous anger that surged through me now. She saw the hesitation in my face. "Please, Helen," she whispered. And for the first time, I saw a genuine vulnerability in her eyes. She wasn't a powerful lawyer or a demanding wife. She was just a sick, pregnant woman who needed help. But I couldn't see that. All I could see was the woman who had taken my son, taken my home, taken my purpose. All I could hear were her words from that day in the kitchen. "I need to be the one who cooks here. Think of yourself as our cherished guest." I straightened my back, and the cold, hard shell I had built around my heart became impenetrable. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. Jess blinked, taken aback. "No?" "That's right. No." I repeated. Terrible, icy calm settling over me. "This is your kitchen. You made that very clear. Jessica, you are a grown woman with a husband. He is the one who should be taking care of you, not me. If you want breakfast, you should ask him." The vulnerability in her eyes vanished, replaced by a flash of hurt, then disbelief, then pure, unadulterated anger. Her face hardened. "I see," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I see exactly what kind of person you are." She turned without another word and walked away, her back ramrod straight. I closed the door, my heart pounding with a strange, triumphant rhythm. I had stood up for myself. I had used her own rules, her own words, to finally win. A half hour later, I heard the front door open. It was Michael. I heard his footsteps, then the low, urgent sound of Jess's voice from the kitchen. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. She was telling him what had happened. There was a long pause. Then, I heard his footsteps again, coming towards my room. They weren't his usual, tired shuffle. They were heavy, angry, deliberate. Each step was like a drumbeat, counting down the final seconds of my life in that house. The door flew open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Michael stood there, his face a mask of fury I had never seen before. It wasn't the frustrated anger from the day the crib got wet. This was something different. This was a deep, cold rage that had finally boiled over. He wasn't looking at his mother. He was looking at an enemy. "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously low. I stared at him, my triumphant feeling evaporating into pure terror. "Michael, what?" "You heard me," he snarled, taking a step into the room. "I just found my pregnant, sick wife, who you refused to make a piece of toast for, on the floor because she was so dizzy she almost fainted trying to do it herself. I come home to find her crying, telling me that my own mother would rather watch her starve than put a piece of bread in a toaster. That's not what happened. I cried, scrambling to my feet. She told me I wasn't allowed in the kitchen. I was just doing what she asked. I don't want to hear your excuses, he roared. And the sound of his voice, the voice I had once sung lullabies to, made me flinch. I have listened to the complaining, the sighing, the silent treatments for months. I have tried to be patient. I have tried to be a good son and a good husband. But this is the end. I am done. He strode past me, grabbed the small suitcase I kept in the closet, threw it on the bed and started yanking my clothes from the drawers, stuffing them inside. Michael, stop it. Please. I begged, grabbing for his arm. You don't understand. He shook me off, his eyes blazing with a pain so deep it looked like hatred. Oh, I understand perfectly. Mother, you're unhappy, so you've decided to make everyone else miserable too. Well, I won't let you do it to my wife. I won't let you do it to my family. He slammed the suitcase shut, the sound echoing the final closing of a door between us. He grabbed it by the handle, took my arm in a grip of steel, and started pulling me out of the room. Michael. No. I sobbed, digging my heels in. But he was too strong. He dragged me through the house, past the living room where I had seen them crying, past the kitchen that had been our battlefield. He dragged me to the front door, the very door I had walked through with such hope only 6 months ago. He threw it open. The November wind howled outside, carrying the first drops of a cold, hard rain. If you can't live in this house and be part of this family, he shouted, his voice cracking with the sheer force of his emotion, then you don't belong in this house at all. So get out. Get out. He shoved the suitcase into my hands, pushed me out onto the porch, and slammed the door in my face. The lock clicked. It was a sound of absolute finality. I was outside, alone, in the rain, staring at the warm, glowing lights of the house that was no longer my home. The sound of the lock clicking into place was so final. It seemed to sever a chord deep inside me. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch, the rain starting to soak my thin sweater, my mind refusing to accept what had just happened. My own son, my Michael. He had physically pushed me out of his home. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and leaving a hollow, ringing silence in my ears. My first impulse was to bang on the door, to scream his name, to beg him to let me back in. But my limbs felt heavy, filled with a cold, paralyzing shame. What would I even say? He had looked at me with such hatred. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was a monster in his eyes, a threat to his wife and unborn child. The thought was a new kind of agony, sharper and more profound than any I had ever known. My hand, clutching the handle of the suitcase, was trembling so violently I could barely hold on. I stumbled down the porch steps, my legs unsteady beneath me. I didn't know where I was going. My car was still in their driveway, a dark shape in the growing storm, but the keys were in my purse, which was still in my room. The guest room. I had nothing. Just the clothes on my back and this small suitcase full of things my enraged son had thrown inside. I walked away from the house with its warm, mocking lights. I walked down the perfect suburban street, where every lawn was neat and every window held the promise of a happy family inside. The rain was relentless now, plastering my hair to my skull and seeping into my shoes until my socks were cold and heavy. Each step was a squelch of misery. I thought about Tom. What would he think if he could see me now? His Helen. His strong, capable Helen. Wandering the streets like a beggar. He would have been so angry with Michael. But he would have been disappointed in me, too. Tom was a peacemaker. A man of quiet reason. He would never have let things get this far. He would have seen the storm gathering and found a way to steer us all to calmer waters. But I was alone at the helm, and I had steered our family straight into the rocks. There was only one place I could go. One person who wouldn't turn me away. Carol. She lived 45 minutes away by car. But for me, on foot, in the rain, she might as well have been on the other side of the moon. I fumbled in my coat pocket, my numb fingers searching for my phone. It was there. The screen was slick with rain, but it lit up when I pressed the button. I found her name and hit call, praying she would answer. Helen? What's wrong? You sound. Are you outside? Her voice was a lifeline in the roaring darkness. He threw me out. Carol. I sobbed, the words torn from me on a wave of grief. Michael. He threw me out of the house. What? Oh, my God. Where are you? I don't know. I'm just walking. It's raining. Stay right where you are, she commanded, her voice suddenly sharp and focused. Find a street sign. Read it to me. I'm getting in the car right now. I looked around through my tear-blurred vision and saw the green and white sign at the corner. Willow Creek Lane. I told her. And then I huddled under the flimsy awning of a bus stop, shivering uncontrollably, my whole body shaking with cold and shock. The wait felt like an eternity. Every car that passed sent a spray of icy water onto my legs. I felt invisible, a piece of forgotten trash on the side of the road. When Carol's familiar sedan finally pulled up to the curb, I almost collapsed with relief. She jumped out, her face a mask of worry, and wrapped a blanket she'd brought from the car around my shoulders. She took my suitcase, bundled me into the passenger seat, and cranked the heat up to full blast. I couldn't stop shaking. She didn't press me for details on the drive to her house. She just kept murmuring soothing things. It's okay now. You're safe. We'll figure it out. She held my hand, her warm, dry fingers a stark contrast to my own icy ones. Her home was the complete opposite of Michael and Jess's. It was small, a little cluttered, and smelled of coffee and dog hair. It was wonderful. It was real. She sat me down in a comfortable, worn armchair, wrapped me in another dry blanket, and put a steaming mug of tea in my hands. My teeth chattered against the ceramic rim. Only when I had stopped shaking and the warmth had started to seep back into my bones did she sit down across from me. Now, she said gently, tell me everything. From the beginning. And so I did. I told her about the toast. I told her about the cold, triumphant feeling I'd had when I said no. I told her about the rage on Michael's face, the force of his hands as he pushed me out the door. As I spoke the words aloud, the last of my righteous anger crumbled into dust, leaving only a vast, empty landscape of regret. I was awful. Carol, I whispered, staring into my mug. What I said to her, what I did, it was a terrible thing. She was sick. She was asking for help. And I threw her own words back in her face to hurt her. Carol listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she was silent for a long moment. I braced myself for her to agree, to tell me that I had brought this on myself. Instead, she sighed. You were all wrong, she said, her voice soft but firm. You, Michael, and Jessica, all of you, you were hurt, so you built a wall. She was scared, so she built a boundary. And Michael, poor Michael was stuck in the middle, trying to hold up the roof while the foundation crumbled. And he just broke. She leaned forward. What you did this morning was wrong. Helen. Yes. But it wasn't the cause of all this. It was just the final straw. This has been building for months. A series of small hurts and misunderstandings that you all let fester because nobody was brave enough to have a real, honest conversation. I looked up at her, my eyes pleading. But how do I fix it? He hates me. He doesn't hate you, she said, shaking her head. He loves you. What you saw on his face wasn't hate. It was pain. It was the agony of a son who felt forced to choose between his mother and his wife, and who will probably never forgive himself for the choice he made. He's hurting just as much as you are right now. While I was finding refuge at Carol's, a different kind of storm was raging back at the house on Willow Creek Lane. I found this out later, piecing the story together from a tearful confession from Michael Weeks down the road. After he slammed the door on me, he turned around, his body trembling with adrenaline and rage. Jess was standing in the hallway, her face ashen. She had watched the whole thing from the living room window. The look on her face wasn't one of triumph. It was horror. "Michael, what did you do?" she whispered. "I did what you wanted," he said, his voice raw. "I fixed it. She's gone." He expected her to be relieved, to rush into his arms and thank him for protecting her. Instead, she started to cry. "I never wanted this," she sobbed, backing away from him. "I never wanted you to throw your own mother out in the rain. I was angry. I was upset. But I never, ever wanted this." "What did you want, Jess?" he shot back, the dam of his own long-held resentments finally breaking. "You wanted her out of your kitchen. You wanted her out of your life. You complained every single day about how miserable she made you. I finally do the one thing, the horrible, awful thing that I thought would make you happy. And now you're telling me it's not what you wanted?" "I wanted you to talk to her," she cried. "I wanted you to be a husband and a son and mediate, to help us find a way to live together. I didn't want you to be a monster." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and undeniable. He recoiled as if she had struck him. The fight that followed was the worst they had ever had. All the unspoken frustrations, all the stress and fear and miscommunication of the past 6 months, came pouring out. She accused him of being a coward, of letting things get this bad because he was too afraid to confront either of them. He accused her of being rigid and unforgiving, of never giving his mother a fair chance from the very beginning. They yelled until they were both hoarse, until Jess was so exhausted she could barely stand. In the end, there were no winners. There was just a shattered, silent house, filled with the wreckage of their anger. Michael retreated to the garage, pacing back and forth amidst the lawnmowers and toolboxes, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of guilt and regret. What had he done? He had thrown his elderly mother out into a storm. The thought made him physically ill. Meanwhile, sat alone in the living room, her hands wrapped protectively around her belly. She had gotten what she thought she wanted, the house to herself. But it wasn't a victory. The silence was deafening. The space that my presence had once occupied now felt like a gaping wound. She realized, in that quiet, miserable moment, that she hadn't just been fighting with an interfering mother-in-law. She had been fighting with a lonely, grieving woman who was terrified of being forgotten. A woman who showed her love in the only way she knew how. And she, in her own fear and insecurity, had refused to see it. The toast wasn't just toast. It had been a test. And they had all failed. Back at Carol's house, I spent the night in her cozy guest room. But I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring into the darkness, the events of the day playing over and over in my mind. Carol was right. We were all wrong. I had been so focused on my own pain that I never stopped to consider Jess's. She wasn't just a career woman who wanted a perfect house. She was a young, first-time mother, scared and hormonal, trying to create a safe nest for her baby. My constant presence, my old-fashioned ways, my unspoken disapproval, it must have felt like a constant invasion, a constant criticism of her own ability to be a wife and mother. For the first time, I put myself in her shoes, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of empathy. Maybe my love hadn't felt like love to her. Maybe it had felt like control. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about getting back into the house. It was about starting the long, painful process of healing what we had broken. I found Carol in the kitchen, sipping her coffee. I need my car keys, I said, my voice steady. And my purse. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. Are you sure you're ready? No, I admitted. But it has to be done. She nodded. Michael called here. About an hour ago. You were still asleep. He was frantic, asking if you were here. If you were okay. He sounded broken. Helen. My heart ached for him. What did you tell him? I told him you were safe, she said. And I told him if he wanted to talk to his mother, he knew where to find her. But he needed to come alone. And so I waited. The hours crawled by. With every car that passed on the street, my stomach clenched. What would I say? What could I possibly say to fix this? The answer was nothing. There were no magic words. All I could offer was the truth. Finally, just after noon, Michael's truck pulled into Carol's driveway. He didn't get out right away. He just sat there for a long time, his head resting on the steering wheel. He looked like a man heading to his own execution. Watching Michael from the window felt like watching a stranger. He looked smaller, diminished, the confident set of his shoulders replaced by a weary slump. When he finally opened the truck door and stepped out, he moved like an old man, his feet dragging on the pavement. Carol met him at the door and exchanged a few quiet words before letting him in. She gave my arm a reassuring squeeze as he passed her in the hallway, then discreetly disappeared into the back of the house, leaving us alone. He stood in the entryway of Carol's living room, not daring to come further. His eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed with exhaustion. He wouldn't look at me directly, his gaze fixed on a spot on the carpet somewhere between us. The silence was heavy, filled with the ghosts of yesterday's anger and a lifetime of unspoken love. I was the one who broke it. Michael, I said, my voice softer than I intended. He flinched, as if the sound of my voice was a physical pain. He finally lifted his head, and the raw grief in his eyes almost broke me. Mom, he choked out. I am so sorry. The words were a crack in the dam, and everything came rushing out. He stumbled forward and fell to his knees in front of my chair, burying his face in my lap, his broad shoulders shaking with deep, ragged sobs. He cried like he hadn't cried since he was a little boy who had fallen off his bicycle and scraped his knee. All the stress, the guilt, the fear he had been carrying for months, poured out of him. My own tears started to fall, silent drops that landed on his dark hair. I wrapped my arms around him, holding my son, my only child, and just let him cry. There were no accusations, no defenses. In that moment, we weren't a broken family. We were just a mother and a son, mourning a terrible wound that we had inflicted on each other. When his sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, he pulled back, his face blotchy and wet. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, looking ashamed. I never should have. I don't know what happened to me. He whispered. The anger. It was like a poison. I saw you. And I saw Jess. And I felt like I was being torn in two. And I just snapped. What I did. Mom, throwing you out like that. It was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I'll never forgive myself. Shoo. I soothed, my hand stroking his hair. It wasn't just you, Michael. We all broke. I broke, too. He looked up at me, confused. What you did was, it was cold, Mom, refusing to help her. It was cruel. I corrected him, my voice firm with the clarity I'd found in the long, dark night. It was a cruel and petty thing to do, and I am deeply ashamed of it. I was so wrapped up in my own hurt. I couldn't see hers. I saw her as the enemy who was taking my family away, not as a scared young woman trying to build her own. I kept trying to love you all the way I knew how, by doing things for you. I never stopped to ask if that was the kind of love you actually needed. We sat there for a long time. Talking. Really talking. For the first time in 6 months. He told me about the pressure he was under at work. The financial stress of the new house and the coming baby. He told me how much he loved Jess, but how her modern, independent way of doing things sometimes made him feel useless, too. He confessed that he had seen the growing chasm between his wife and me but had been too cowardly to step in, hoping it would just fix itself. In turn, told him about the crushing loneliness I felt after his father died. I told him how selling the house felt like erasing my entire life, my entire identity. I admitted that coming to live with them, I had seen it as my last chance to be needed, to have a purpose. And when that purpose was rejected, I felt like I had nothing left. I wasn't trying to take over. Michael, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I was just trying to hold on, to feel like I still mattered. You always matter, Mom, he said, his own voice cracking. You're my mother. That's all that's ever mattered. The simple truth of his words was both a comfort and a sorrow. We had let so much get in the way of that simple fact. He told me about the awful fight he and Jess had after I left. How she had been horrified by his actions. She's just as sorry as I am, Mom, he said earnestly. She knows things went too far. She wants you to come home. I took a deep breath. The word home hung in the air. For months, their house had been anything but. I don't think that's a good idea, I said gently. He looked crestfallen. You can't forgive me. It's not about forgiveness, sweetheart, I explained, taking his hands in mine. It's about understanding. We can't go back to the way things were. It wasn't working. Living under the same roof. It's too much for all of us right now. Jess needs to be the queen of her own castle. Especially with the baby coming. And I think I need to find a way to be the queen of my own, too. An idea had been forming in my mind. A small seed planted by Carol's practicality and watered by my own painful self-reflection. There are some lovely senior apartment complexes not too far from you, I said. Small, manageable, place that's my own, where I can hang my pictures and cook what I want, when I want. I can't let you do that, he said immediately, shaking his head. It would feel like I'm abandoning you. You wouldn't be abandoning me, I insisted. You'd be helping me. You would be giving me back my independence and giving your wife her space. It's the best thing for all of us. We can build a new relationship, one that isn't based on who is in charge of the kitchen, but on respect and distance, a little bit of healthy distance. He was quiet, turning the idea over in his mind. I could see the logic of it warring with the guilt in his heart. We could see each other for dinner once a week. I continued, painting a picture of a new future for us. I can come over and babysit my grandchild. You can come to my place when you need a dose of Mom's pot roast. We can be family again, instead of roommates at war. Slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. Okay, Mom, he said. If that's what you really want, we'll make it work. I'll help you, financially. With the move, whatever you need. That's all I ask, I said, my heart feeling lighter than it had in a year. It wasn't a perfect solution. It was a retreat, of sorts, but it was a strategic retreat, one that would allow us to regroup and, eventually, find our way back to each other. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. Michael was true to his word. He helped me find a wonderful one-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex just a 10-minute drive from their house. He and Jess paid the security deposit and the first month's rent, insisting it was the least they could do. He helped me move the few pieces of furniture I had in storage, and together, we went shopping for the things I needed to make my new little place a home. There was one notable absence during this time, Jessica. She didn't come to see the apartment. She didn't call. I knew she was giving me space, And perhaps she was still too ashamed or too awkward to face me. I understood. Healing would take time. And it couldn't be forced. The day I finally moved into my own apartment was one of the happiest of my life. It was small, but it was all mine. The sun streamed through the living room window. I hung the picture of Tom on the wall. I put my favorite quilt on the bed. I unpacked my old, familiar pots and pans and arranged them in my own kitchen cabinets. In my own beautifully inefficient, illogical way. The first thing I did was bake a batch of cinnamon rolls. The smell filled my small home. A warm, sweet scent of a new beginning. A few weeks later, about a month before Jess was due, I got a phone call. It was her. Helen? Her voice was hesitant. It's Jessica. Hello, dear. I said warmly, my heart giving a hopeful leap. I was wondering if you were busy this afternoon. I wanted to know if I could come over for a cup of tea. I would love that, I said, and I meant it. When she arrived, she was carrying a small, potted plant. It was a rose bush, a miniature, thornless variety. I thought your new patio could use some color, she said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. This one is guaranteed hypoallergenic. It was a peace offering, a beautiful, thoughtful one. I took it from her, my throat tight. Thank you, Jessica. It's lovely. We sat in my small living room, making awkward but polite conversation over tea and the cinnamon rolls I had made. We talked about the weather, her doctor's appointments, the color she was painting the nursery. We didn't talk about the fight. We didn't talk about the rain, or the toast, or the slam door. It was too soon for that. Maybe we would never talk about it. Maybe we wouldn't have to. As she was getting ready to leave, she paused at the door. Your apartment is really nice, Helen, she said. You've made it feel very warm. Thank you, I said. It feels like home. She finally looked at me then, a genuine, sad smile on her face. I'm sorry, she whispered, for my part in everything. I was so scared of losing control. I think I forgot how to be kind. I'm sorry, too, I whispered back. I was so scared of being useless. I forgot how to listen. It wasn't a magical absolution. It wasn't a Hollywood ending where we all hugged and cried and everything was instantly perfect. But it was a start. It was a bridge, built carefully, plank by plank, across the chasm that had opened between us. 3 weeks later, in the middle of the night, my phone rang. It was Michael. She's here, Mom, he said, his voice thick with wonder and exhaustion. You have a granddaughter. I drove to the hospital, my heart singing. I walked into the room to find Michael sitting in a chair, fast asleep, and in the bed, looking tired but radiant, was Jess. Cradled in her arms was the most beautiful, tiny, red-faced creature I had ever seen. Jess looked up at me and smiled, a real, unguarded smile. Her name is Lily, she said softly. Lily Rose. She held the baby out to me. Would you like to hold your granddaughter, Grandma? The word grandma was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I sat on the edge of the bed, and she gently placed the warm, swaddled bundle in my arms. I looked down at Lily's perfect, sleeping face, her tiny fists curled up by her cheeks. A wave of love so powerful, so immense, washed over me, cleansing all the remaining hurt and bitterness from my heart. This was my purpose. Not to cook, not to clean, not to manage their lives, but to love my son, to love his wife, and to love this precious new soul. Jess reached out and put her hand over mine, our fingers interlacing over the sleeping baby. We looked at each other, and in that quiet, shared moment, I knew we were going to be okay. Our family was not broken. It had simply been rearranged, and in its new shape, There was room for everyone.